No one saw it coming. In the middle of a royal dinner, with diplomats, dignitaries, and cameras watching, Queen Camilla stood up and walked out. No warning, no explanation, just silence. And then came the moment that shook the palace. King Charles broke down in tears right at the table. The monarch, who had held steady through scandal, grief, and war, shattered by a single walkout. What triggered this dramatic exit? Why did the Queen leave so publicly? And what royal truth finally pushed Charles to the edge? The answers lie behind palace doors, and they're explosive. The dinner that changed everything. Buckingham Palace was glowing that night. Candlelight danced against gold-trimmed walls. The crystal chandeliers sparkled above a table so perfectly arranged, it looked untouched by time. Footmen moved quietly, dishes were placed with precision, and royal guests murmured politely over their wine glasses. Everything looked perfect. Until it wasn't. Queen Camilla sat in silence most of the evening. Her hands didn't tremble, but her eyes gave something away. A tightness, a weight. And then, without warning, she placed her napkin gently beside her untouched plate. She stood up. The moment was subtle at first. Only the guests closest to her noticed. But when she began walking, slowly, purposefully, the entire room seemed to stop breathing. Her face was pale, emotionless. She didn't say a word. Not to Charles, not to the guests, not even to the aides. Just the sound of her heels clicking against the polished marble, echoing louder with each step. One royal guest whispered, "Is she unwell?" Another leaned in, eyes wide, mouth still half open from their last bite. No answer came, because no one knew what was happening. When Camilla reached the grand double doors, she didn't pause. She walked straight through them and vanished into the corridor. Two royal aides rushed after her, but they quickly returned, empty-handed and shaken. And at the head of the table, under the soft glow of gilded chandeliers, King Charles sat frozen. His fork slipped from his hand. His shoulders, normally pulled upright with posture drilled into him since childhood, collapsed slightly. He stared at the door she had disappeared through, as if willing her to return. She didn't. He blinked once, then again, and then something extraordinary happened. The king cried. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical, but it was unmistakable. His eyes welled with tears, and for a moment that cut through centuries of royal stoicism, Charles looked less like a monarch and more like a man undone. One guest, a foreign diplomat seated just 2 chairs away, said later, "I've attended state dinners all over the world. I've never witnessed anything like that. It wasn't just awkward, it was heartbreaking." Royal aides rushed in discreetly. Some attempted to redirect attention to the food. Others tried light conversation, anything to steer the evening back on course. But the energy had changed. It was as if the air itself had gone heavy. What had just unfolded wasn't a diplomatic error. It wasn't a misstep in etiquette. It was personal, deeply personal, and everyone in that room could feel it. Behind the palace walls, rumors had swirled for weeks about tension, about disagreements, about cold silences between the king and queen. But never had any of it shown in public. Until now. Camilla's walkout wasn't just a moment of discomfort. It was a message, a crack in the royal mirror. And Charles's reaction only confirmed what many had feared. Something inside the monarchy had begun to collapse. Guests were escorted out quietly once the final course was skipped. Staff whispered in corners, and high-level aides retreated to private offices to assess the damage. The next morning, headlines would speculate. Pundits would spin. But the truth had already settled among those who witnessed it firsthand. The king had cried, the queen had walked out, and the monarchy was no longer in control of its own story. He didn't just look upset. He looked lost. Palace insider. And behind those palace doors, a far greater storm was already brewing. Because that dinner wasn't the beginning of the drama, it was the breaking point. Weeks of silent tension behind palace doors. Behind the grand walls of Buckingham Palace, everything looked calm. The Union Jack fluttered proudly. The guards stood tall. The official photos still showed smiles. But inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. According to insiders, Charles and Camilla had barely exchanged more than a few words in days. And when they did, the tone was icy. Their smiles in public? All practiced. Every photo taken on recent outings masked what insiders were calling a Cold War. Behind closed doors, raised voices echoed down private corridors. Doors were shut hard enough for staff to flinch. The palace may be centuries old, but this kind of silence was new. And the reason behind the rift? It wasn't about love. It was about power. King Charles had begun making quiet but serious decisions about the future of the monarchy. Decisions that would define the next generation. And he hadn't told Camilla. He hadn't consulted her. He hadn't even warned her. One staff member revealed that documents were signed, plans were drawn, and meetings were held, all without the Queen's knowledge. Camilla was furious. She'd fought to be accepted, stood by Charles when the world wanted her gone, endured headlines that tried to erase her, and now she was being sidelined. Insiders say Charles had grown increasingly distant in recent weeks. He began spending nights away from the palace, preferring remote royal residences in Gloucestershire and Norfolk. Staff described him as preoccupied, constantly reading, pacing, writing long notes alone in his study. He wasn't himself, one aide shared, but he also seemed more determined. Camilla, on the other hand, had reportedly become more vocal and more emotional. Her attempts to re-engage Charles were met with silence or vague replies. One witness described a moment in the palace courtyard where she approached him, only for him to wave her off and walk away. She felt betrayed. She had stood by him through everything. But now, she didn't recognize him. Close royal associate. Staff tried to keep the tensions hidden, as always, but signs began to slip through. Fewer joint engagements, unusual cancellations, brief exchanges in public, where once there were gestures of warmth. Photographers captured one awkward moment at a charity event where Camilla turned to say something to Charles, and he simply looked away. It lasted seconds, but for royal watchers, it was telling. Still, no one expected what was coming next. Because just hours before the now infamous royal dinner, Charles summoned his most senior advisors into a private meeting room inside the palace. He spoke with clarity, his voice firm and unshaken. And what he told them would send shockwaves through the monarchy. He had made his choice, not just about a policy, not about a speech, but about the future of the crown and who would one day wear it. Those closest to the royal family say it was a moment that changed everything. The silence, the tension, the emotional distance. It had all been leading to this. Camilla would be left in tears, William would be left speechless, and the kingdom would soon be divided. This wasn't just a royal disagreement, it was a complete breakdown, royal staffer. And when the guests arrived that evening for what should have been a peaceful, formal dinner, they had no idea they were about to witness the fallout. The sudden decision that shook the crown. The morning of the dinner, something shifted. Royal aides noticed it the second King Charles entered his study. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't distracted. He looked like a man carrying something heavy, something final. Without ceremony, he turned to his senior advisors and said, "It's time. I've made my choice." But no one could have guessed what that meant until he added one name. Not William, Harry. The room fell silent. Some thought they misheard. Others stared in disbelief. This wasn't just a private preference. Charles was making it official, the kind of royal move that bypassed centuries of protocol. There was no discussion, no formal process, just a cold, clear command from the king himself. And he didn't stop there. He told them there would be no leaks, no rumors. The announcement would come directly from him in his words. He didn't want spin. He didn't want palace press games. What he wanted was control. One advisor reportedly cried. Another simply walked out. For the rest, there was no room for questions, only obedience. Charles had decided the future of the monarchy, and it didn't include the person everyone expected. The king didn't hesitate. He wasn't angry. He was just certain. Senior palace official. In the hours that followed, every royal phone buzzed. Schedules shifted. Invitations were rewritten. Staff began moving behind the scenes, preparing for something seismic. But there was one person still left in the dark, and her name was Camilla. And just as the dust was settling, another shock arrived through the gates of Buckingham Palace. Prince William. Prince William's silent exit. He had no idea what he was walking into. Prince William arrived at the palace mid-afternoon, answering a royal request that had sounded formal but vague. He assumed it was a routine briefing. Instead, what he walked into was nothing short of a royal earthquake. The meeting with his father was brief, painfully brief. Those close to the family say William emerged just 20 minutes later, pale, jaw tight, completely silent. No cameras caught the moment, but one guard shared, "You could see it in his walk. Something had changed." He didn't stop to speak to anyone. He didn't greet Camilla. And when he passed Prince Harry, who had arrived earlier through a private entrance, he didn't even look in his direction. There were no words, just silence. For a man raised to be king, William's world had just been pulled out from under him. All those years of preparation, all those public duties, replaced in a heartbeat. He wasn't furious. He wasn't broken. He was frozen. Inside sources said Charles hadn't given him a choice. He simply explained that Harry was now the future, and walked away. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just nodded and left. Royal insider. Back in Kensington Palace, staff didn't know what to say. His wife, Princess Catherine, reportedly stayed by his side, offering quiet support. But even she couldn't change what had just happened. And while William's silence grew louder by the hour, another storm was about to explode, right in the middle of the royal dinner. Because as guests gathered for what was meant to be a calm evening, Queen Camilla had just been told. And what she did next would shake the palace even harder than Charles's announcement. Queen Camilla's private breakdown. She was the last to know. Queen Camilla arrived late to the palace that afternoon, expecting a formal dinner and the usual royal routine. But instead of smiles and chatter, She was greeted with hushed whispers and unreadable faces. Something was off. It wasn't until she stepped into a private study with King Charles that she found out. And when she did, everything changed. According to a senior aide, her hands trembled as he spoke. She didn't interrupt. She just stared at him, her expression slowly falling apart. Charles reportedly said it plainly. "It's Harry. He's the future." No discussion, no compromise, just his decision, final and firm. For Camilla, it wasn't just about a title. It was about loyalty. Years of standing beside him, through scandal, rejection, public hatred, all of it. She'd rebuilt her image, carved a place next to him, stood tall when many had hoped she'd disappear. And now she felt like she had been pushed aside. An aide who passed by the room later said they heard muffled sobs. When Camilla finally emerged, her eyes were red. She held onto a staff member's arm just to stay steady. She didn't cause a scene. She didn't yell. She didn't demand answers. She just vanished, quiet, heartbroken. You could see it on her face. Something had shattered. Palace employee. That evening, she sat alone in her chamber. No one disturbed her, not even Charles. The corridors outside were silent. But she wasn't finished. Not yet. Because as night fell, the Queen made a decision of her own, and she would make it in front of the world. The walkout. A royal rejection. Dinner began like any other royal affair. Quiet elegance, formal speeches, polite smiles. But the tension in the room was impossible to ignore. Camilla arrived last. She said nothing. Her eyes didn't meet Charles's once. The table was long. The mood was fragile. Guests tried to act normal, but they all knew something was wrong. And then, just as the main course was served, Camilla stood up. At first, no one noticed. Then, all at once, and the room fell into silence. She didn't speak. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at Charles. Just looked. And then she walked away. Her heels echoed across the floor. She passed royals, diplomats, aides, her face unreadable. Not a word. Not a glance back. The Queen of England had just walked out on her king. Gasps broke out around the table. One guest whispered, "Is this real?" Another simply stared, fork still in hand, frozen mid-air. Charles didn't move. He sat still, eyes locked on the door she had disappeared through. And then, his expression crumbled. For the second time that day, the King of England was seen wiping tears from his eyes. It was like the room shattered. Nothing felt royal anymore. Dinner attendee. The dinner limped on, but the evening was over. Everyone knew it. Conversations stopped. Smiles faded. And inside the palace, panic started to rise. Because this wasn't just a disagreement between husband and wife. This was a royal rejection, one that happened in front of the entire establishment. Behind the scenes, aides scrambled to contain the fallout. But there was no spinning what had just happened. The Queen had left. The King had cried. The air was silent. And the new future was already inside the building. Because while one part of the monarchy was breaking apart, Prince Harry was preparing to take his place. Prince Harry's quiet return to the palace. No fanfare, no press, no photos. Prince Harry returned to Buckingham Palace under complete silence. A black car, tinted windows, and a private gate. But inside, his presence was like a spark in dry grass. Many staff hadn't seen him in years. Some had only watched him from a distance in California. Now, here he was, walking through the same palace halls he once abandoned. Head high, no hesitation. He didn't greet William. He didn't ask for Camilla. He didn't even stop for pleasantries. His path was direct, straight to his father's study. Guards outside said they could feel it. This wasn't a social visit. It was something bigger. And behind that thick oak door, only two people sat face to face: the king and the son he once thought he had lost for good. It wasn't a reunion. It was a meeting of purpose. Senior palace official. No aides were allowed inside. No recordings. No notes. Just the two of them. A father, a son. A kingdom in the balance. Whispers around the palace spread quickly. Why was he back now? Had he agreed to return permanently? Had Charles truly chosen him over William? Some called it betrayal. Others called it destiny. But everyone agreed something historic was unfolding, and Harry wasn't here by accident. One guard reportedly said he didn't look nervous, he looked ready. Because this time, Harry hadn't come as a runaway prince. He'd come as the king's chosen one. And behind that locked door, Charles was about to tell him what happened inside that room. For over an hour, the two men didn't leave. No shouting, no dramatic exits. Just long conversation. The kind that changes everything. Sources close to the palace say Charles spoke first. He laid it all out. His doubts, his regrets, the public pressures, the strain on William, the silence in the house, the distance that had crept in over the years. He told Harry exactly why he made this choice now, and why he needed him to come back. Not just as a son, not just as a duke, but as the future. The monarchy can't survive on tradition alone, Charles said, according to one insider. It needs someone who can connect again. He wasn't talking about bloodlines, he was talking about trust, about image, about leadership, and most of all, about survival. Harry reportedly listened quietly. No interruptions, no gloating. When he spoke, it was calm, focused, clear. He didn't demand titles. He didn't ask for power. He just asked, "Are you sure?" Charles nodded. From that moment on, the direction of the monarchy shifted. There was no formal declaration yet, but everyone inside the palace felt it. The weight of that conversation. The finality of it. When Harry exited the room, he didn't say a word. His face gave nothing away. But behind him, Charles reportedly stayed seated, looking both relieved and wrecked. They came out as two men who had finally said everything they needed to say. Confidential royal source. By evening, word had quietly spread to top advisors. A statement was being drafted. It would be brief, it would be official, and it would change royal history. Because within hours, the world would know Prince Harry wasn't just back. He was next. The crown passed in silence. No royal fanfare, no grand balcony moment, no golden carriage, just one quiet press release. And the monarchy turned on its head. By mid-afternoon, the palace dropped the bombshell. A short statement. No embellishment. No video. Just these words. His Majesty the King has expressed his wish for the Duke of Sussex to take on an expanded role in service to the Crown, reflecting future responsibilities. And just like that, it was done. Prince Harry had been named the future. Not by rumor, not by tabloids, but by the king himself. The reaction? Immediate, explosive, global. But inside Buckingham Palace, It was nothing short of surreal. There was no celebration, no champagne, no music in the halls. Staff moved quietly, adjusting schedules, rewriting documents, briefing departments that had no clue how to prepare for what came next. William's name wasn't mentioned once in the statement. Camilla stayed silent. Even the senior royals, cousins, distant relations, former aides, kept their heads down, because no one could explain it, and no one dared challenge it. The future had just been handed to the one royal who had walked away, royal historian. Outside the palace gates, the public was in shock. Some called it justice. Others called it betrayal. But what everyone agreed on was this: the royal family would never be the same again. And while debate raged in headlines and homes, something even more dramatic was happening behind the scenes. Because Camilla was already gone. Camilla leaves the palace and doesn't look back. She didn't scream. She didn't pack. She didn't even wait for the end of the day. After everything, the announcement, the dinner, the tears, Queen Camilla sat alone in her private sitting room, a glass of water trembling slightly in her hands. She didn't speak for nearly an hour. Then she stood, walked to the door, and called for her car. Staff were stunned. There was no